Do you ever wonder why consumerism is so strong and why, as a, we can say, political regime, is actually so prominent in society? Now, what is consumerism? Well, consumerism as a term has been used to define a society in which people are highly dominated, let's say, by a survival urge. Okay. Now, what is basically a survival urge? Well, technically, survival and urge are kind of pleonastic because survival is an urge already. One doesn't need to call it an urge because it's, by definition, uh, well, let's say an instinct, right? And an instinct is nothing else than an impulse, right? A subconscious behavior through which something, right, must ensure its own, physical existence. Now, survival is only physical based and it is the realm of the mind, right? Now, it is the realm of the physical mind, as I at times prefer calling, but I usually don't use this term because I might actually, confuse people. Now, the mind is represented by the brain in the physical body, and there is also the physical, well, less physical. Yes, it is still physical, but less perceptible, but it is basically the mental body. Now, the point about the mind is a tool that we as animals have used only to survive. Now, many people might say that we use the mind to know things, right, to learn and to adapt and to the such, but ultimately what we use the mind for is to survive. In a society where money is the most important thing and people still obey these theatrical play rules that we have to work our lives till the end just for some piece of paper that we have collectively agreed to call money and we have collectively given the meaning that it buys our own lives, right? The point is, as long as that happens, right, we will live in a society where people will be dominated by the point of owning things. The funny thing about this world, however, is that no one actually owns anything. Because we, as, let's say, spiritual energy, or let's call ourselves life force, right? We embody a physical body through which we embark this physical journey. Now, the point is, this physical body has multiple layers of physicality which go less and less perceptive, but ultimately a problem is that people identify themselves with the physical body the most, because it is the most perceptible as well. However, the point is, when you join this physical journey, it's kind of the same thing as creating a video game character. It doesn't have a physical body, but it has, just like the physical body, it has several layers to it, right? Like there are the graphics that you see, there are the animations, and of course, if you go deeper and deeper, all of those are nothing else than images that are correctly loaded in a correct sequence through the code, which is basically the lowest layer of that, which is also the least perceptive one. So it's kind of the same thing. Unfortunately, just like in video games, people identify themselves with those characters, and that's when they kind of end up as trapped. When people end up as trapped somewhere, the point is they kind of trigger an automatic response system, which is technically the survival. Now, the survival point is hard-coded. You cannot overwrite it, you cannot outpower it, because when the physical body feels itself under a possibility of harm, not necessarily harmed, it has a certain amount of coding that it will trigger. It can also call to the discernment, right, or the mental capabilities, right, the stored information, and it can actually formulate certain strategies, but again, the discernment is limited on how much one knows, right? So if you don't know much about survival, then that won't necessarily help you much. But there are a lot of strategies that the body can employ. All these strategies are nothing else than survival instincts. Guess what? These instincts are constantly being triggered in this society because we live in a sick society where people, irrespective of how much they do, society treats them as if they are, just irrelevant. In kind of any place that you go, you're usually gonna be paid the minimum wage unless you work a certain period of time and probably you get some salary raises. But ultimately, irrespective of how much money you gain through a salary, there are two big problems, right? A salary that's earned through a job is, well, a salary earned through a job. Job means just over broke. So it doesn't matter that you win $100,000 from that job or just $1,000. The difference is $100,000, let's say, very rare chances to earn from a job, right? But that is still a little amount of money, because the point is there is always the fear, right? There is always the problem that you might lose that job. So it doesn't matter if you earn through that job all the money in the world or you barely exist, because there is always that precipice, right? There is always that danger that you might sooner or later lose that job, right? And once you have no more money, well, then it's just a matter of survival. But it's already a matter of survival because you already know, at least subconsciously, that without your job you won't be able to pay your dues, right? So the problem is, humanity will always live in this idea of survival. Now, this idea causes a lot of trauma, right? And what survival means is a traumatic response system. So technically, you are locked in karma, right? Now, what does karma mean? Well, karma means memory. Technically, it is the black box of your existence, right? Any aircraft has something called a black box. It is made of the sturdiest materials that we know on this planet. So the point is, it has very little chances of breaking even under the most, brutal crashes of the aircraft. And hence the reason why it's the sought after material, right? When people come to salvage the aircraft, they always come for the black box because that's where all the technical data and, failure reports are stored, as well as, different other recordings. Now, the karma is the foundational structure of the physical body, right? There are multiple types of karma, but let's say the karma is also a recording system. Everything that you do is recorded somewhere, right? And it's not gonna be used by that white-bearded fuck that has traumatized the whole planet, namely God. Well, not God themselves, but the way God and religion portrayed this aspect of, post-life judgment, which has terrorized the whole planet, and apparently, through some statistics, it's one of the top fears of humanity. The point about this is, well, this karma, right, represents everything that you have gone through in your own life, all of the events, all of the actions you took, and especially all of the reactions as well. Because a reaction, right, when you react to something, that is an unconscious behavior, right? When you react to something, it is always a traumatic response system. Ignorant people, aka people who live unconsciously, or shortly said, impulsively, these people will always work based on impulses. So they're technically just like machines who execute a few functions of code based on what condition or conditions are true. So when you have such cases of people, right, they will react to any event through an impulse. And an impulse is, in all cases, a traumatic response, right? It is a response that acts in order to prevent or to lessen the influence of a traumatic possibility, right? So, example, when you are going to be scolded by your parents, you're most likely gonna do something to prevent that, right? You're gonna behave the way they want so that you don't get scolded, because being scolded has a very traumatic influence on your emotional body, right? Because in most cases, parents are ignorant people. They have lived under the influence and, the dream spells of the Matrix, right? The society as we know, and hence the point is, as they have lived like that, well, they don't know much other than, what they have been taught and what they have experienced. What you have experienced is always true because it is what you have experienced. The problem is, people may identify with that very easily, and, well, when you are ignorantly living, it is much easier to traumatize others or treat others at least as badly as you have been treated, right? Because it is much easier rather than accepting something beyond that comfort zone. Because ultimately, everything on this planet, or well, probably in the whole universe, seeks a sense of comfort. But if comfort is sought, comfort can only be reached in ignorance. Because in ignorance, people get identified with something which instantly becomes their comfort zone, right? If some people are toxic, they are toxic because not because that's the only thing that they know. In most cases, yes, that is the only thing that they can know, and technically the only way they have taught themselves, they have been taught, and ended up, as part of a lot of traumas, to act, right? So it's how they know, how they have been shaped into acting, and well, several other, factors, let's say. But that is one point, right? And in some cases, a few cases, it's not the only one, but again, it is a comfort zone. It is the only way, or the most pleasant way for them to act, because ultimately their whole life has been shit enough. When you have people who rage over games, or who start pissing you off, or they start challenging you, through quotes and the such, right? Through typing different posts, right, that they trigger or want to trigger your attention, you can only imagine how traumatic their life is if they can only recur to swears and cursing in video games to make themselves feel a bit more satisfied, right? When you see people who just rage about video games and, who start typing in chat that they feel so happy that you're losing and they're winning, you can only imagine how much amount of pain they are going through, because ultimately no one can naturally write that they are feeling happy because of someone's pain, right? Because that's what humanity is all about. Being a human is all about being humane, right? Empathy, the ability to feel other people's emotions. But with a lot of people living ignorantly, and aka living in survival mode, they are simply disconnected from their emotions. That is why they won't be able to feel or perceive through other people's facades, as well as, their emotions and how they truly feel, not what they just portray. Because many people portray, a fake mask, right? A fake persona, just so that other people don't try to get too close, because many people don't feel comfortable when other people get too close, because people are knowledgeable of the most powerful thing in the world. You are a nothing. And anyone who feels that they are a nothing, they should actually feel privileged, because they are very, very close to enlightenment. Ultimately, you come in this world as nothing because you don't know anything, you don't own anything, and at the same time, you don't have any emotion or any state or any opinion. All of those you just draw upon, right? You have some of those drilled into your head by school, society, parents, friends, and the such. Most of them you accept willingly, some of them through your own discernment, but ultimately they are just collected, right? And when you leave the physical body, right, when you perish and you leave this world, you'll also go as nothing, because everything that you have accumulated in this world remains in here. Well, except your karma, which is the only thing you will take with you. Now, karma, I wanted to say, is a repetitive process, right? When you are stuck in a process that, well, you cannot escape from, right? And this means a cycle, right? It starts all over, you go through the same traumatic experience, right? It actually gets a bit improved, you cannot cope with it, and when the cycle ends, well, unfortunately, you are not yet capable of releasing it, right? You're still stuck in some mindsets that do not serve you. So the cycle begins again, right? It's the same principle. For game addictions, smoking addictions, drug addictions, it's the same thing. It's just a cycle. Now, traumatic responses are still a cycle, because point is, people have been traumatized for thousands and thousands of years, right? Thousands of generations. None of them have been taught how to correctly raise your children. So the only thing they did was raise, well, to a certain extent, at least smaller monsters, or in some cases bigger monsters than each of the generations was. Because when you are ignorant, you only act as impulse, right? And you get pissed every time you get scolded, because people don't know what emotions are in ignorance. There is no such thing as emotions in ignorance. It's just a full disconnection. And when there's a full disconnection, you're also disconnected from your own feelings, thoughts, emotions, and, well, you kind of feel dead. So you have a feeling that everyone else also feels dead, so you're gonna completely disregard their emotions as well. The point is, as this happens, well, that's kind of problematic, because by disregarding other people's emotions, you open yourself to traumatizing them. By, abusing them in all sorts of ways. Verbally, through actions, right? Degrading them, using shame and guilt against them, which is nothing else than a way of control, right? Because survival means control. When you want to survive, you want, technically, situations to go the way you want. That's one aspect of survival, right? Because you're hungry, the only thing you can think of is, well, controlling the situation in such a way that you get some food and you eat, right? That's one point. So that's like a little trauma, right? It constantly repeats. You're constantly on the lookout, right, for food, and, well, as you are looking for food, you're only interested in that and, satiating your hunger. It's the same thing with traumas. When you're traumatized, you're always gonna run from that thing because you're living unconsciously, right? When you allow traumas to have an influence on you, you're living unconsciously, because unconscious, right? The unconscious way of being means fight or flight, or shortly said, survival. And survival means run away. Every time there's a situation of pain, you'll see that unconscious people instantly flee, right? They either become aggressive and they fight back, or they run away. Fight or flight. That's how you see if people are ignorant, right? It takes a great amount of resilience and a great amount of consciousness, right? Awareness of the situation to simply stay there and let people degrade you or whatever they want to say, because you just know that they are spewing words at you, right? All the meaning that you put on words comes from you, not from them. Language exists as a collective agreement, right? We use the same words so that we can understand one another. When someone curses you, if you don't place any importance on those words, they're just a bunch of sounds. If someone calls you an idiot, you'll only, fuss about that because you are unconscious, right? And unconsciousness, again, means survival. But not only of the survival body, right? The physical body. It also means survival, at the collective level, and also the survival of the self, aka the personality you identify yourself with. So the point is, your personality feels endangered when someone calls you a stupid person. That's why I made a video entitled Why You Should Always Trust Your Talents, Not Your Persona, right? You should always trust your talents because they're always gonna be the same, at least. And as you work towards those are gonna become better. The personality can change due to different events that you go through and decisions and ideas that you take up. Now the point is, the personality is just something volatile that you have created and or accepted. So the point is, your talents are always gonna be the same. If someone, calls you an idiot, your talents aren't gonna be changed. Your talents are gonna be at least the same, right? But since it's gonna trigger, an unconscious behavior if you are, ignorant, that is a little problem. Because when you fuss about that, you will want to run away from that, right? And the point is, if you run away from that, or let's say beat that person, it is only as a response, right? Because there is a traumatic event, right? There's a traumatic trigger, something that triggers a wound, right, from your past, because that's technically what a trauma is. It is a wound you got in the past and you haven't made peace with it. You're still giving it so much attention, and every time you give it attention, it becomes bigger and bigger, right? It's like a skin wound that you have, and instead of allowing it to heal, you just, constantly poke at it, right? And it's gonna heal, but much harder. And it's gonna bring out a lot of, pain in the sense, because it's gonna always be harder for it to heal, and it's gonna signal you, hey, stop poking me because, well, I will give you pain, right? Pain is nothing else than a signal that something is not good. So the reason why people are feeling stressed is because they are not doing the right things to serve them. The right things to, preserve their health, preserve their emotional health, preserve their energy health, and as well as, their mental health. And of course, the psychological health. Now, the point is, when you have so many traumas, right? And people ending up living unconsciously because they believe that when you disconnect yourself from your emotions, you no longer feel the pain. But the pain is still there, right? Which makes things even worse, because no longer feeling the pain, it always makes things much worse because the pain is still there, right? And if the pain is no longer felt, then you're gonna feel it through other ways, right? Because ignorance always brings in suffering. There is no other way. The moment one chooses to live in suffering, right, they can only live in suffering as ignorance. Because if people become more and more aware, they will also become more and more connected to their body, to the fact that they're not eating well, they're not sleeping well, they're not probably sleeping enough, and their behavior is probably self-destructive. So the more aware they become, they will automatically do whatever it takes to be, more and more balanced, right? To embrace, let's say, more of a regenerative approach in life. Now, the point about this is when you have so much traumatic experience, right, and people living unconsciously, everything that will be given to them, they will gladly accept. Because ignorance means accepting everything without discernment. That is why ignorant people are also, impulsive, right? Impulse means a lack of patience, and also um, a lack of thought in the end, right? Because you're never going to use your discernment to think about things. Something pops in your face, you want it, right? Because ultimately, the reason why that happens is because it is usable as a distraction. Now, why are distractions powerful? Is because they are very good traumatic responses, right? When a trauma comes back, right, you remember how people would call you not good enough, or bad names, or bully you, or you've been through some sort of sexual rape, or whatever traumatic experience you have gone through, because trauma doesn't mean just beating the child, right? There are so many ways, like even taking their favorite toys, because children create powerful attachment towards those, and when you take those toys away, the point is, well, you will cause a lot of emotional pain. Now, the point is, many of the parents, being unconscious, they will never be capable of understanding that. They have been dealt the same thing, so they will deal with children in the same way at least, because now they also feel justified to do that, right? They have the power to do it, because ultimately survival is only control. You are living in a dream state, right? You're dreaming of a world in which everything goes the way you want. But, well, in unconsciousness, people still won't understand, or they won't accept the point that the world will never go the way they want. Because the world can't go the way you want, right? It can't go the way everyone wants, because ultimately we would just destroy one another. So ultimately, with so much trauma, consumerism comes in, perfectly. Because all it does is, well, it disregards humans, right? Through the point of, living under the influence of a job system, right? And being paid with the minimum wage and barely on survival, people want distractions, right? Because they get this feeling, well, ultimately their life ends up as being sucky, because everything is kind of bad. You have to sleep a lot to have the energy for the day, to deal with the toxic people you will have to deal with, to work your ass out for someone, right? You're technically allowing someone to, empower their dreams, because working in a job means fulfilling other people's dreams, right? You're working for other people, right? The CEO and, the bosses of the company, they are getting their dreams fulfilled. While at the same time, of course, you might actually be, improving a person's life if you are, for example, technical support, or someone that deals with people and, it helps them in one way or another. but ultimately you're always helping other people achieve their dreams, and when you come back home you barely have any energy to work towards a life that will fulfill you. So when you have so many of these things, well, people will want distractions, because the point is, when you have a traumatic trigger, there is always a fight or flight. You cannot fight fate because, well, the way life goes, there will always be things to trigger you, to test you, right? There will always be those. Now, the point about this is, well, if you can't fight them, you will always want to run away from them. And that's when your pains become stronger and stronger. Because running away from something means constantly feeding it with fear. Fear is generated out of a tremendous amount of your energy, hence why you'll always feel so tired, right? And the point is, you'll always want to run away. That is why shallow people will always run away from literally everything. Because responsibility is the greatest nightmare of ignorant people. Because responsibility means going through more or less pain. And of course, unconscious people cannot accept pain because they will either fight it, just like people are fighting change, because change is the only constant. And change always brings pain in people who embrace a certain comfort zone. So the point about this is, well, now you have people running away from literally any little pain, right? Because they are shallow people. They embrace a comfort zone, which means shallowness, and, well, they will run away from literally anything. They will embrace only, shallow relations, right? When they have to just speak with people, go through some, sex probably, but when it comes to deeper emotions, they will run away from that because they feel that they are unworthy, or they feel that emotions are always about pain, right? So consumerism comes as a very powerful tool, because the point is, it doesn't matter how reality is for ignorance, because reality, well, it doesn't matter how reality truly is, right? You always have to look at how reality is in the mind of the ignorance, because that's how you control them the best. And the point is, how reality is for ignorance is how you impose it, right? If you say that another, outbreak of a dangerous disease occurs, ignorance will simply accept it, because they accept literally everything. And they always need a distraction to run away from their traumas. That is why people end up in karma, right? Or technically, when your past becomes your future, which is unfortunately the saddest point in life. Why? Because you have a certain trauma in the past and you don't want to make peace with it. You're just constantly ignorantly running away from that, which is pleonastic, but I said it so that people may understand it better. When you run away from that, you're technically gonna improve that pain, because by running away from that, you're constantly gonna think about that. And as psychology states, every time you think about something, you're adding an extra layer to it, right? So you're making it a deeper and deeper trauma, right? And you'll reach a moment when you're no longer capable of running away from that. I mean, you've technically forgotten the trauma. It became so big that your mind fully suppressed it. But you're still gonna act impulsively because that trauma still influences you. It's just that you're no longer knowledgeable at a certain level what influences you, right? And when you're an ignorant person, when you live unconsciously, everything influences you, because the only thing that you know is impulsive behavior, right? A trigger happens, your coding takes place, right? You're simply in autopilot mind. You're not consciously taking decisions. You're just letting circumstances decide for you. And that's kind of a very sad way of being. And the point is, you're not only traumatizing, you're not only improving that trauma more and more the more you run from it, you're also creating other little traumas through your behavior, right? Because you're gonna disregard other people, and you're also gonna disregard yourself. So you're constantly creating newer and newer karma, which only helps improve your previous ones, right? Your previous traumas, the big ones that influenced this fight or flight behavior. And you will feel only more and more pain, because in ignorance there is just a constant sinking in suffering. And the more you sink in suffering, the more you will run away from it instinctively, right? And the more you run away from that, you will create even more suffering. And that is why it becomes a cycle that you cannot escape. But fortunately for people who want to rule the world, there are simply distractions, right? That's why we have social media. And they are very powerful at keeping people distracted from who they are because it preserves that comfort zone of the mind, right? As I said in a previous video, the mind only provides comfort to those who feed it the most. So the point is, the more you feed your mind with all sorts of gibberish, now you have so many things to fuss about and think about and constantly think about, and that is kind of funny because you're always going to use those as a distraction. But ultimately, irrespective of how much you distract yourself, the moment you pull your eyes away from your phone or your computer or whatever distraction you have, the point is you're instantly reminded that your suffering is there, right? That is why drug abuse also exists. People use drugs to induce themselves in different states of awareness, right? They're simply numbing themselves down so they no longer feel the pain and any awareness of this world, but the suffering still exists. Then when they wake up, they have created additional suffering, so they feel that they must drug themselves again, right? It's constant and constant and constant. Everything that is a pattern is nothing else than a traumatic response, right? It is a way to deal with the trauma, right? But ultimately what you're doing is you're constantly improving it without realizing. So that is why many people live, um, in cycles, right? In patterns that won't simply allow them to be. So the problem is consumerism is kind of used as medicine, right? It is used in a way that, keeps distracting people because you have so many things that you theoretically want. Don't forget, when you came into this world, you came having nothing, and in your life you still own nothing, right? Even if society and we in society play this role that by having a certain piece of paper with some writing on it, you claim ownership of a certain object, you don't truly own it, right? You just have an emotional and psychological attachment to it, while also mentally knowing that that tool can actually make your life better. But that's technically all, because in the end, it's just that. It's just a traumatic response. You need something to distract yourself from the pains, right? And owning a new thing, even if you realize soon afterwards that you didn't need it, it's still a very needed distraction because it, distracted you from your pain for several seconds. And if a person still embraces ignorance, they will repeat this cycle, so they will simply blow their money on literally everything. And, they have to work their asses to gain that little amount of money that they get, or more money if they get more money. But the point is, ultimately, if people are kept in survival mode and they constantly live in the fear of God and fear of everything in this world, right? Everything can go wrong in this world. That is why people are always connected to things that are bad, right? That is the only reason why bad news proliferate, because people are connected with that, right? People are attracted to bad things, and that's what technically sells. If that no longer sells, the news will adapt and, they will present different things, right? So consumerism means buying literally as much as possible under the influence that, all those new things will make your life better. But ultimately, that is an illusion because you have the impression that without that service or that product, right, your life will suck. And of course, there have been so many improvements in, the aggressiveness of advertisements, right? Because all they need is the attention of ignorant people, because they will instantly feel that their life sucks without that object. They will constantly want something new because it comes as a little challenge, like a little quest in a video game. You feel like you have a purpose, working your life towards getting that object. You end up feeling dissatisfied because it doesn't give you any extra pleasantness in your life, so you will get attached to the next object. That is why living an ignorant life is always equating to living in suffering. Hopefully this video was, more eye-opening. You are appreciated. Take care of yourselves. Become more introspective, and you will see that the answers you're looking for are just there, hoping and waiting for you to discover them. You are appreciated. Ferenc on board, signing out.